Before we get started, I see that we have a handful of new subscribers, so I just wanted to say welcome to the club. It's a great group we got here, and the internet hasn't found out about us yet, so we're just kind of enjoying the time together and having some fun talks about different things. And today, we're going to talk about a real hootenanny, so let's get to it. Moral Orel, which is hard to say, was created by Dino Stamatopoulos, a longtime comedy writer who's maybe best known for his role as Starburns in Community. Moral Orel is his magnum opus. The show spends a lot of time taking aim at Christian fundamentalists, albeit in a pretty basic and straightforward way. The episodes follow a very simple formula, much like David and Goliath, the Christian claymation show that Moral Orel is very clearly parodying. In just 11 minutes, a Christian concept is introduced, then explained to Orel, and then Orel misinterprets the concept to disastrous and sometimes funny effect. Aside from the very direct critique of Protestant ideology, it also uses that tropey technique where you take something we associate with childhood and innocence and you make it edgy. Now, if that's all that Moral Orel was, I wouldn't have given it much of a look, but season 3, the final season of the show, is the main attraction, and I think it can teach us a lot about how to let viewers sympathize with pretty reprehensible characters without giving those characters a pass. So while seasons 1 and 2 stuck to that one single formula with very little variation, season 3 breaks the mold completely. In terms of the storyline, season 3 takes place slightly before, during, and well after a camping trip from the end of season 2 that Orel takes with his father, Clay Puppington. Bad stuff happens on the camping trip. No big spoilers, but yeah, it's pretty significant. Up to this point, the characters have been incredibly one-dimensional, and it's clearly an intentional move. Many of them seem to represent broader archetypes, and their names are just a little bit on the nose. We have Mr. Second Opinionson, who's a retired doctor. Nurse Bendy is attractive, pretty dumb, and objectified by most men in town. Agnes Sculptham is a school teacher, and Doey Latchkey has parents who rarely pay attention to him. I think you get the idea. But as season 3 takes off, the characters get deeper and we learn quite a bit about them in very little time. In fact, all this character development happens so quickly, I thought about making this efficiency itself the subject of the piece. In fact, one of the early episodes shows us a very different side of Orel's mother, Blaberta Puppington, formerly Blaberta Hymantact. She spends the episode seeking more and more violent sources of pain because it takes something so extreme to make her feel anything at all. Season 3 is just littered with that kind of stuff. The show had already had some pretty graphic moments before this, but these episodes go somewhere far deeper and they can be incredibly rough to watch. It's that combination of dark subject matter and very genuine realism that we now associate with shows like Louie and BoJack Horseman, just years earlier than either of those. This brings us to an interesting conflict, one for screenwriters and viewers alike to grapple with, especially if this particularly dark comedy is going to stick around for a while. Let's say a character is objectively bad, or at least that this character does objectively bad things. Is it possible for a show or a movie to show sympathy for this character and explain their past traumas without also implicitly normalizing those actions and making them seem somehow acceptable? BoJack gives us an easy example of this problem in action. The show established its title character in a pretty stunning way. BoJack is a very believable character, especially in his badness. He uses alcohol and drugs to cope with past and present traumas, and in turn, he treats everyone in his life badly. As the show went on, the realness of his character flaws became more and more prominent, but throughout, there was always a risk that viewers would see BoJack as a sympathetic character, and he is a sympathetic character, but only up to a point. There's this really fine line between sympathizing with a character and endorsing that character. For one thing, we have a natural tendency to believe that the protagonist of a story is someone we're supposed to root for, no matter what. That comes with the hero's journey and thinking, oh, a protagonist equals a hero, which is really not always the case, definitely not anymore. Even somewhat darker anti-heroes are very often still likable and good-hearted. Think Batman, specifically like Batman from the animated series. Even BoJack aligned itself with shows like The Sopranos and Mad Men, therefore aligning BoJack himself with Tony Soprano and Don Draper. Both are characters who are questionable in terms of morals. In all of these cases, there's a danger that viewers will come to admire the leads regardless of what they've done. In one of the final seasons of BoJack, the writers made it clear that they'd been grappling with this problem out in the real world. During the premiere for Filbert, a detective show with a morally questionable lead, the character Diane explains that she doesn't want the show to make assholes feel okay about being asshole. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the general idea. With BoJack, there was always a risk of that happening. It's no big surprise that real-life people struggling with substance abuse who had indeed alienated themselves by treating their loved ones poorly related to this character, and I think we can agree that while there shouldn't be any limits on the types of characters that can be shown in fiction, it's also not a good idea to deify characters who should not be looked up to at all. But if every viewer is free to interpret fiction however they want, how can creatives prevent this from happening? I kind of doubt that there's a surefire solution here, but I do think Season 3 of Moral Orel comes really, really close to finding the solution, or at least a solution. I'd like to talk about one episode of the show in particular, and I will be spoiling this one, so prepare yourself for that. It's called Passing, and it's essentially the childhood backstory of Clay Puppington, Orel's father. What we already know about Clay is that he's a devout Christian, at least in name, and he often twists biblical lessons to fit his needs in the moment. He hits Orel as a form of discipline, and he drinks a lot. When we travel back to Clay's childhood, we see that he's especially close with his mother, who is extremely religious. She also has a strong aversion to any form of the word dead. Clay's father is bitter that his wife doesn't pay attention to him anymore. Anyway, after Clay makes an incredibly sad realization about his mother, which You can watch and find out for that one. He plays a prank where he pretends to be dead so that he can get even more attention. This gives his mom a heart attack and she dies right there on the floor. So Clay and his dad are left alone, hating each other for their own reasons. The only time Clay gets any attention from his dad is when he gets hit, so he starts misbehaving just to get hit again, a gesture that Clay now sees as affectionate and loving in a really skewed way. So here we have our objectively bad character in Clay. He's abusive, he's an alcoholic, and he's completely uninterested in his family and just about everything else. Over the course of the show, there's definitely a temptation to admire Clay. He's unintentionally very funny, and he's definitely a fan favorite for multiple reasons. And after watching the episode Passing, it would be very easy to feel sympathetic toward Clay and maybe even forgive him for what he does in the rest of the show. But thankfully, the tone of the show, and specifically the tone of this episode, does a great job of making it clear that even if a character has found some kind of resolution or pleasure, it doesn't mean that it's a healthy resolution. It's not a healthy source of pleasure. But to me, Clay's most effective condemnation comes in a different episode called Sacrifice. Sacrifice is definitely one of my favorite episodes of the series, mainly because it brings a lot of different storylines to a head. And while I'll avoid talking about all those storylines and how they get brought up in this episode, I would like to mention the climactic moment for Clay's character. With some of these central characters gathered in a bar, Clay just unleashes this wild rant about how pointless it is to pursue marriage and a family and how much he regrets all of his life choices, basically. As with any speech that's delivered with passion, there's a risk that a viewer might see the dialogue as some kind of grand statement, one that speaks to the misery of spending a life doing what you're told. And there's some of that in there. There are some points being made, I guess, but much more importantly, it confirms a lot of what we've already learned about Clay through the course of the series. He's angry, he's insecure, and he feels trapped in his life. This isn't a speech where the little guy stands up to the man. It's a ploy for attention, evidenced by what Clay does after the speech is over. Everyone in the room looks ready to fight him, and Clay just sticks his face out, waiting to get hit, which is a clear reference to the backstory episode we just talked about. He's just acting out again because he has deeply ingrained positive associations with the idea of punishment. Clay isn't a role model, and he's not a hero for the tired tired and average, and the team behind Moral Orel made that very clear. The writing deals with all of these subjects carefully while also refusing to shy away from uncomfortable content. And we have to give a lot of credit as well to Scott Adsit, who, in addition to voicing Clay and several other characters, directed episodes of the show, contributed writing, and was a co-producer as well. Clearly, the team had a strong vision of what they wanted the show to be, and they executed that vision extremely well. So what are the takeaways here? Well, characters should be allowed to be whatever they need to be, and if a character does things we don't want to condone, then the artist in question shouldn't leave that part up to interpretation. There's more than one way to condemn a character's actions, and it doesn't need to be simplistic finger-wagging. You can do this with tone, with music even, and just in general with really good writing. It's the gestalt, it's all of these different elements coming together to make a message clear to the viewer, as opposed to leaving things so vague that there's a danger of saying something that you didn't intend to say at all. But aside from the more heady elements here, I just wanted to talk about the show. Especially before Rick and Morty, Adult Swim's audience was pretty limited and insular, and I'm not sure Moral Orel ever really got the attention it deserved. It's also not that hard to find if you haven't watched the show yet. I'm not too surprised that big-name streaming services haven't been pursuing this one. And that's about it. Thanks for stopping by. I tried to keep this short yet again. Hope this has been interesting in some way, and if you have a comment that you would like to share, you know what to do. All right, bye.